Hi friends, Flat Larry and I are back to share more adventures with you of his friend, Flat Stanley. Flat Stanley by Jeff Brown. Remember, we're reading his original adventures. There are actually lots of Flat Stanley books, so if you like this one, when we finish it, maybe you'll be interested in exploring some of the other ones. If you remember, Flat Stanley has had lots of adventures so far. He found Mom's ring down in the gutter, and he got mailed to California, had a trip, a nice easy trip in the mail, and he was a kite. Remember, he did that for his brother Arthur because Arthur was feeling kind of not so special and left out. It's really a nice thing for Flat Stanley to do. And then last time, silly Flat Stanley pretended to be a painting so he could catch the art thieves in the museum. He has had a lot of adventures so far. This time, we are going to read the adventure of Arthur's Good Idea. Who is Arthur again? Stanley's brother. Let's take a look and see what happens. Here's the first page. See Stanley walking along? For a while, Stanley Lambchop was a famous name. Everywhere that Stanley went, people stared and pointed at him. He could hear them whisper, "Over there, Agnes, over there. That must be Stanley Lambchop, the one who caught the sneak thieves." Remember, he had been in the paper for catching those thieves in the museum. But after a few weeks, the whispering and the staring stopped. People had other things to think about. Stanley didn't mind. Being famous had been fun, but enough was enough. Do you know what that means when you say enough is enough? It means, okay, stop. That's plenty. And then came a further change, and not a pleasant one. People began to laugh and make fun of him as he passed by. "Hello, super skinny," they would shout, and even ruder things than that about the way he looked. Should we ever be saying rude things about the way someone looks? No. Does it really matter how they look? Stanley told his parents how he felt. "It's the other kids I mostly mind," he said. "They don't like me anymore because I'm different. Flat." "Shame on them," said Mrs. Lambchop. "It's wrong to dislike people for their shapes, or their religion, or the color of their skin, or any of those things." "I know," Stanley said. "Only maybe it's impossible for everybody to like everybody." Perhaps," said Mrs. Lambchop, "but they can at least try." Later that night, Arthur Lambchop was woken by the sound of crying. Who do you think was crying? Let's find out. In the darkness, he crept across the room and knelt by his brother Stanley's bed. "Are you okay?" he said quietly. "Go away," Stanley said. "Don't be mad at me," Arthur said. "You're still mad because I let you get tangled the day you were my kite, I guess." "Oh, skip it, will you?" Stanley said. "I'm not mad. Just go away." Oh dear, Stanley is really upset. "Please, let's be friends," Arthur said to Stanley. He couldn't help crying a little too. "Oh, Stanley, please tell me what's wrong." Look, is Arthur being a friend to Stanley? He is. He's his brother. But brothers can be really good friends. So can sisters, too. He's being a friend by coming over when Stanley's sad, putting his arm around him and asking him what's wrong. See how his face looks concerned? And Stanley's face looks very upset, doesn't it? Stanley waited a long time before he spoke. "The thing is," he said, "I'm just not happy anymore. I'm tired of being flat. I want to be a regular shape again like other people. But I'll have to go on being flat forever. It makes me feel sick." "Oh, Stanley," Arthur said. He dried his tears on a corner of Stanley's sheet, and he couldn't think of anything more to say, but he sat there to be with his brother. "Don't talk about what I just said," Stanley told him. "I don't want to make folks worry. That would only make it worse." "You're brave," Arthur said. "You really are. Isn't it a good feeling when someone tells you something good about yourself? So, if someone else is not feeling good, you might be able to tell them something good about themselves. Like, for instance, if Mom is sad because maybe she can't go to work and has to work from home and misses her work friends, you could tell her what a good job she's doing, and that might help just a little bit." All right, so Arthur tells Stanley he's brave, and then he took hold of Stanley's hand, and the two brothers sat in the darkness together, just being friends. They were both still sad, but each one felt a little bit better than he had before. And then suddenly, though he was not even trying to think, Arthur had an idea. He jumped up and turned on the light and ran to the big storage box where the toys and things were kept. He began to rumble about in the box. Wonder what he's looking for. Maybe a toy to cheer Stanley up? Or maybe something different? Let's read and find out. Stanley was interested too. He sat up on the bed to watch. Arthur threw aside a football and some toy soldiers and some airplane models and lots of wooden blocks, and then he said, "Aha!" He had found what he wanted, an old bicycle pump. Why do you suppose he wants an old bicycle pump? Stanley was upset about still being flat, and Arthur had an idea and went searching for a bicycle pump. What does a bicycle pump do to flat things? Let's read on. Arthur held up the bicycle pump, and he and Stanley looked at each other. "Okay," Stanley said, "but take it easy." What do you think's gonna happen? Stanley put the end of the long pump hose in his mouth and clamped his lips tightly around it so that no air could escape. "I'll go very slowly," Arthur said. "If it hurts or anything, wiggle your hand at me." So he began to pump very slowly. And at first, nothing happened, except that Stanley's cheeks bulged out a bit like this. Can you do it? Arthur watched Stanley's hand, but there wasn't any wiggle signal, so he kept pumping slowly. And then, suddenly, Stanley's top half began to swell. Swell means get bigger. "It's working," Arthur shouted, and he pumped away. Stanley spread his arms so that the air could get inside him more, and he got bigger and bigger, and the buttons of his pajamas popped off. Pop, pop, pop! A moment more, and he was all rounded out, head and body, arms and legs, but not his right foot. That just stayed flat. Arthur stopped pumping. "It's like trying to do the very last bit of those long balloons," he said. "Maybe a shake would help." Stanley shook his right foot twice, and with a little whooshing sound, it swelled out to match the left. There stood Stanley Lambchop as he used to be, as if he had never been flat at all. "Oh, thank you, Arthur," Stanley said. "Thank you. Thank you very much." The brothers were shaking hands when Mr. Lambchop strode into the room with Mrs. Lambchop right behind him. "We heard you," Mr. Lambchop said. "Up and talking when you ought to be asleep, eh? Shame on—" "George!" Mrs. Lambchop said. "Stanley is round again." "You're right," Mr. Lambchop said, finally noticing. "Good for you, Stanley." "I'm the one who did it," Arthur said. "I blew him up." Everyone was terribly excited and happy, of course. Mrs. Lambchop made hot chocolate to celebrate the occasion. Clink! And several toasts were drunk to Arthur for his cleverness. When the little party was over, Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop tucked the boys back into their beds and kissed them. And then they turned out the light. "Good night," they said. "Good night," Stanley and Arthur said. It had been a long and tiring day. Very soon all the Lambchops were asleep. The end. That's the last of this book, The Original Adventures of Flat Stanley. However, right here is some information about Jeff Brown. Remember, he's the author. Let me read it to you. Jeff Brown created the beloved character of Flat Stanley as a bedtime story for his two sons. He's written other outrageous books about the Lambchop family, including Flat Stanley, Stanley and the Magic Lamp, Invisible Stanley, Stanley's Christmas Adventure, Stanley in Space, and Stanley Flat Again. You can learn more about Jeff Brown and Flat Stanley on their website. It also has some information down here at the bottom about Mackie Pimentoin, who is the illustrator. It says that he lives in San Diego with his wife and his dog. And that's the end, my friends. Did you enjoy the adventures, the original adventures of Flat Stanley? Well, if you like this story time reading, give me a comment on the Facebook page, because I'd be happy to continue some story times for you if you find that that's a fun thing to do at home. Just let me know. In the meantime, I'm thinking about you and praying for you, and I hope to see you soon. Bye. Flat Larry says bye too. Bye, Flat Larry. He says he's going to post some of his adventures soon. He's been inspired by Flat Stanley.